Good morning and a very warm welcome to this presentation by ViroGates and in connection with its report for the second quarter of 2021. The company is today represented by CEO Jakob Knudsen and you will hear from him in a minute. As for myself, I am Alf Riple. I work for Västra Hamnen Corporate Finance and I will be your moderator for today. We should start with a presentation by Jakob and after that there will be a Q&A session. You are invited to ask questions by writing them in the field that's either on the right side of your screen or the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. It says questions and it might be indicated with the talk bubble. You can enlarge that and write your questions there. We will read them out and Jakob will answer. All that remains for me to say is that this session is being recorded and that the recording will later on be found on Västra Hamnen's channel on YouTube and on ViroGates homepage. So with that, I give the word to you, Jakob.
Thank you, Alf. I'm happy to present our first half year report for 2021, and this time it will only be me. Normally I have Mark with me, but he's occupied elsewhere. So let's jump directly into it. As usual, we will do both a general overview of the business for the ones who are not familiar with the business already, and then focus also on the financials, and lastly also on a little bit more disclosure on the holdings by management, both in terms of warrants and shares, something that is new to our report compared to previous reports. So ViroGates is an international medical technology company. We work within in vitro diagnostics, and this is what we do as our only business. We were founded back in 2001 and we're headquartered in ViroGates, just north of Copenhagen. We are today 14 employees and we were listed in 2018 on the First North here in Copenhagen. Our mission is to improve patient outcomes by measuring the protein suPAR. And just a brief introduction to the protein that we work with, the suPAR, which is an abbreviation, as you can see on the screen. It's a naturally occurring substance protein in the human bloodstream. suPAR increases with increasing inflammation. It's the immune system in the patients or individuals' response to increased inflammation. So what we have documented in a lot of clinical studies is that it's very capable of predicting negative patient outcomes, and how we deploy that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later. Basically what our business looks like is depicted here. We work in the emergency departments by providing these blood tests, and the way into the emergency department is typically by referral from a general practitioner, by ambulance, or in certain markets by personal appearance in the department. The primary aim for us is actually to help the emergency departments discharging patients early on. And we do that by measuring the suPAR level, and if it's below 4 nanograms per mil, there's a very low risk of a negative outcome. So that means that the patient's immune system is capable of dealing with whatever inflammatory issue that they're presenting with. And as you can see also, this actually applies to roughly 50% of the patients. It doesn't mean necessarily that we can automatically discharge all of them, but it's certainly an aid in the work of the emergency doctors when they can see that this is confirming that they can discharge the patients early. So on the other hand, other side of the spectrum, we also have the high risk patients. Those are the ones with more than 6 nanograms per mil in the blood, and this is something that should put up a warning sign for the emergency physicians that this patient probably needs additional attention. The next slide shows some data from a study, and it's actually quite important for knowing what suPAR can contribute. If you look at the top bar, you can see that actually more than half of the patients that are presenting when they are triaged in a traditional way by ways of physiological scores, roughly half of them are actually in this sort of we don't really know what to do with the patient's category. That is the yellow box. So when we add suPAR to that, and we did this in the study, you can actually see that the number of green patients increases dramatically up to 52%. And that's the good news, because then we are able to advance the discharging process in that category. You also see an increase in the red box, and you actually also want that as an ED physician, because you don't want to discharge a patient or not devote enough attention to that particular patient if it's a serious patient. So we basically help the physicians make the right risk stratification of the patients. The value propositions that we are pushing to our customers is that we can improve the patient outcomes. We do that by, as said, getting rid of the patients that do not need admission. That's actually also in the interest of the patients, because they run the risk of having hospital-acquired infections if they get admitted without the proper reason to do so. We also reduce the healthcare costs. We have data showing that we have shortened the hospital length of stay by 6%, and that actually amounts to quite substantial numbers. I'll show you some examples later, because it's very important. It's very expensive to occupy hospital beds. Lastly, we also empower the clinical staff, especially the junior physicians, and there are many of those in the ED, because it's manned outside of traditional hours and so on. So it's typically a starting point for many physicians. They get to make decisions much earlier than they otherwise would have, and they probably in many instances do not need to call on more senior physicians to make the actual decisions to discharge. Our product is prognostic, and by that I mean you typically see in vitro diagnostics as being diagnostic, its ability to show a particular disease. We are not showing a particular disease, but we are much better than any of the other markers in showing what is the risk associated with this particular patient on the short to midterm horizon. We are non-specific, and by that we mean that anything that gives rise to inflammation, which is basically the body's cellular systems responding to an infection or to some sort of immune reaction. It can also be a chronic disease like cancers, type 1 and 2 diabetes, and so on. Anything that is in development will be reflected in the suPAR result, and therefore we basically sum up the evils of the patient, if you like, in a popular way. We have a very stable protein. That's also important, but there are many examples of other proteins that are highly fluctuating. One is the CRP that is also mentioned. It's also known as the infection marker that's typically taken in the GP setting as well. Another one is troponin, which is where you basically need to do 2 blood samples with 4 hours of difference in order to show the development. We can react on just the one measuring. It's fast. We now have products that allows for a response in about 20 minutes. In terms of our clinical evidence, we have worked, as mentioned, since 2001, where we were incorporated, but actual research dates even further back, and we actually have now in excess of 750 clinical populations in clinical publications in the scientific literature documenting the suPAR's ability to predict negative patients' outcome. A word on a very exciting project that we are part of as we speak, and which is ongoing, is that in May we reported positive results of a super guided placebo-controlled intervention study. The intervention was done by ways of measuring super on all patients admitting with COVID-19 disease and respiratory problems in 42 Greek and Italian hospitals, and they were then randomized to either receive the treatment that they got already, remdesivir, dexamethasone, and other drugs, and placebo, or the drugs that they already had, plus a drug called Anakinra, which is marketed by Sobi, the Swedish pharmaceutical company. And this was conducted very swiftly, and we had the reporting in combination with Sobi and announced it, and we actually saw a 64% increase in the overall outcome for the patients that were super randomized into the Anakinra arm. And that's an extremely high clinical benefit because we're able to save lives, to minimize progression into severe respiratory distress, where patients need oxygen, ECMO treatment, and so on. So we are very enthusiastic about these results, and Sobi has filed for a label extension with EMA, and they expect to get hopefully an approval in October. And we are awaiting that anxiously as well, because obviously the hospitals will need super in order to assess which patients they need to dispense the drug to. In terms of our product portfolio, the one that was launched back in time, the ELISA that you see in the right-hand corner, is an excellent research product. It's very easy to do large biobanks and so on, measuring with the ELISA, but it's not very clinically oriented. It takes about 4 hours to conduct, and way too many controls and so on, calibrators. So it was not really suited for clinical use. The clinical use product that we had initially was the quick triage product that you see on the left-hand side of the ELISA product, which is basically to be compared to an antigen test, as you know them from the COVID. We basically put plasma into the device, and it's the intensity of the treatment line of the test line is then reported by ways of an optical reader. That takes 20 minutes. So that is that has the ability to be used in clinical practice. The product that we have most recently launched is the TurbiLatex, which you see on top. This is comparable to a printer cartridge that you typically know from a typical printer. Here is just a very big machine provided by Roche, Abbott, Siemens, all the like, the big diagnostic companies, and we add super by ways of reagents into this system. So that means that the blood samples that are collected needs no other treatment prior to being measured. They simply go in directly with the test tubes into the system, and super is reported back with all the other parameters. So this is where we expect our growth to come from. This is just illustrating this point. We have worked with this group in Montpellier for a validation program. So we're validating our products with the different platforms. It's underlying, it's the same technology of measuring the light transmittance through the sample, but since they operate slightly different machines, we need also for regulatory reasons to document the results of each platform. And so far we've documented products from Siemens, from Roche, and from Abbott. So those are some of the actually the 3 biggest players in the field. In terms of our sales, we have both direct sales where we have our own salespeople deployed predominantly in France and in Spain and the Nordics. And then we have on top of that what we refer to as our indirect sales channel, where we work with distributors. We have a director managing this here at our headquarters, where we work with traditional distributors of similar products. So it's a mixture of these two channels. As I mentioned earlier, we have data both obviously on the market size, those you see on the left-hand side, where we have a total addressable market right now in the ED, where blood samples are collected currently of about €1 billion. And then we have on the right-hand side, those are basically quantifications of what I mentioned earlier, these saving potentials that hospitals have. So the 6% reduced admission time, that basically translates in Germany to a net savings of 870 million euros if we deploy it in the German market. And that is important to know that it is actually after having paid for the reagents. So even in lower cost markets where the price of hospital bed is lower, there's still a beneficial business case in countries like Poland and so on. So this is one of the value propositions, as I mentioned, that we go to market with. A word on a development project that we have. So this is not a launched product yet, but this is what we refer to as our POC Plus, point of care plus product, which is a small point of care device that is suited for general practitioners, for the EDs, and also for ambulances. There are a lot more markets that we will be able to address with this particular product. The main advantage is actually that it will work with capillary blood, so no centrifugation, no real blood sample is needed. With a venous blood sample, you can simply finger prick, so I can do it myself. It's very easy to set up, has also a turnaround time of around 20 minutes. So it can be placed and used completely point of care. Initially, we will launch it in the ED segment, but then we will develop it further with clinical validation to other customer segments. And as mentioned, it can go directly and seamless into a general practitioner's office, and also to private health clinics or pharmacies, wherever they may be, if patient or if healthy individuals wants their super measured. Super is also an excellent measure of the overall health status of presumably healthy people, and can point to any inflammatory response that is within the individual. In terms of our patents, I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but we have what is known as method of use patents. So we have been able to take out patents based on our ability to prognosticate outcome within different situations, different disease areas. And as you can see, we have 3 patent families worldwide coverage that are issued, and 2 more that we have filed for, and that is currently being assessed by the patent authorities. Furthermore, and I should probably also highlight this, there are research products out there measuring super. It's only ELISA products, and they will be infringing on our patents if they launch it for clinical use. But we actually also know from Salim Hayek, which is depicted on the right-hand side, that ours is by far much more clinically relevant. So it's simply a much better product than any of the others. In terms of the management, I have been with the company for more than 10 years now. I have a background from the pharmaceutical and diagnostics area. I have normally Mark on my side here as the CFO. He has a longer tenure with both creating companies in Asia and also as a management consultant. Our founding father, so to speak, Dr. Jesper Øystein Olsen, is also with us on a part-time. He also does research with Hvidovre Hospital as a scholar there. So, but we have very much benefit in having Jesper on board to drive the clinical development of our products. Then lastly, on the operational side, we have Dr. Thomas Karup, who's our head of sales and marketing. He has a long tenure with big diagnostic companies for more than 25 years. On the board side, we have also strong diagnostic capabilities. Dr. Lars Kongsbak, who's now running a company called Samplex within the RNA diagnostics field. He has a past from a listed company called Hexagon. And Henrik Stender, who has a vast experience with regulatory affairs, also in the US, and Jørgen Torberg, also one of the founders, who's been doing business development all his life, and Lars Korsgaard, who's more on the capital side. He has extensive knowledge from private equity financing and so on. In terms of the actual numbers, as you can see, we had a revenue growth for the first half year, and relatively strong growth, which we obviously also expected and hoped for, these 223%, because this marks our launch of the turbidimetric product. And we're still burning cash, as you can also see in the operating loss that we've been realizing, and also on the cash balance. We have approximately 21 million on the balance, and as we have communicated and as we restate, this is sufficient to bring us to a cash flow positive status within our existing business. So we are confident about that. So in terms of the product mix, the next slide is quite important. It basically shows how we have developed our product mix to increase clinical sales. As you can see, the development shows that we now sell much more to Relatix and quick triage at the expense of ELISA, and this is the development that we actually like to see, because it shows that our products are mainly used for actual clinical use and not for research. So this is also what we expect going further. In terms of what to look out for as an investor in ViroGates, we have pointed to it already. It's basically the data, peer-reviewed publication of the data that I presented, the Anakinra study, the regulatory process with EMA that should happen during Q3 or Q4, and clinical routine customers. We also report on that when we feel certain that a hospital is now using our products for actual clinical routine. And then lastly, we also have the Supernostic POC Plus product, as I mentioned, the development product that we will also report on. As a new sort of thing that we've added to report, and I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but we know that there's a lot of interest and from our shareholders into how much have the operational and the board in terms of a vested interest in the development of the share price and the development of the company. So we have what we would determine a pretty extensive overview of both outstanding warrant programs, and we have two, an older one from 2015 and one that is newer, to retain the operational management. So you can see the development in the warrants and their current status. On the next slide, you can see the actual shareholdings by both management and the board, and you can for instance, noticed that management has a net increase in shares over the last or during the first half of the year. Finally, just a timeline, because it is a little bit complicated, these trading rules for what is known as persons discharging managerial responsibilities, or PDMRs. We operate by having a voluntary window. So the MAR requirements are only that we cannot trade 1 month before a Q report, but actually we have voluntarily said we only have a window of 6 weeks after a release where we will trade, and then any management will stop trading. And we're obviously also, as you probably know, subject to insider courses from time to time, and if we are knowledgeable about anything that could potentially inflict on the share price, we are not allowed to trade, even though we're in an open window. So that we are going to continue on reporting when you can expect that management may or may not trade in the share. And those were the words, Alf. So any questions from either you or the audience?
Thank you very much, Jakob. Yes, we have received some questions from the audience, so I think maybe we should start there. And if you give me just a minute to enlarge it. So I have quite a few questions. You confirm the previous announced delay of the Supernostic POC Plus product. The product will be launched in the second half of 2021. We're now in August. Can you possibly narrow down the time frame? Is it more likely that the POC Plus will be launched in October rather than or in December? And yeah, we can start there perhaps.
Yeah, it's more likely to be launched in December than in October, but we are still subject to, maybe I should explain a little bit what is missing. Basically, the product needs, in order to be cleared for the market according to the in vitro directive, we need to do both an analytical validation and a clinical validation before we are able to launch it. And that is after the product is actually determined as a final formulation. So once a developer, in this case us, determines that this is now as good as it gets, we need to do a rather extensive analytical validation using already collected blood samples and show that it's able to report the results that we expect, comparing to our other technologies. And then we also need to confirm that in a clinical study where we actually show that these are measurable in the setting that we want to clear the product for. So this will initially be the emergency department, and therefore we need to conduct this clinical study. It's not an extensive clinical study. It's probably about 100 patients. So we need to do that before we actually have the product clear. In terms of the actual regulatory process, so far we're actually under a self-declaration. So once this is filed with our quality management system, then we are good to label this as CE-IVD cleared. Okay, so there's no additional period where you file for a CE mark and wait for that to be handled? No. As an add-on, I can say those regulations will change next year, because like we have for the medical device regulations, we have a similar thing for the in vitro diagnostic regulation. So this will change, but we need to register this according to the existing regulations, and that's basically when we've conducted the internal work.
But is there a risk then if you don't complete the process by the end of this year, then you're already into next year, and then the new rules will apply, and then you have to apply for a CE mark and wait for that to go through the motions?
Yeah, the new regulations will not be enforced until 22nd of May next year. So there is some time.
All right.
But
great.
We feel confident.
I'll continue with the questions from the audience there.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. What precisely is your commercial strategy for the product? What initiatives has been taken already, and what will be taken and when? I'm specifically interested in hearing more about your plans or considerations for the private health segment, and in health examinations at private clinics or at medical examinations at your own doctor. That's the first. And also, in which countries do you expect to launch the product? What are the perspectives, and what do you foresee will happen in 2022?
Excellent questions. So in terms of the private segment, initially we will launch this in the emergency department, and one may ask, why is this when you already have products? The reason being that this is where we have the knowledge of the Super reagent already, the product. So we need to strategically make sure that the product is well appreciated in that setting before we take it out a step. Because whether you are as an individual or a general practitioner starts measuring Super, you need to have somewhere to refer the patients if you get a high result, and that will be with the emergency department. So we need to establish with some of the existing channels that they're comfortable with this product initially. So the strategy and what we promise is to develop this initially for the ED, and then we will follow on with studies, because we need to do additional clinical studies in the other segments to prove that this is actually capable of working in the hands of others. So we will need to work with GPs and subsequently also with any sort of health clinic that they can actually run the product. So initially it will be the ED. In terms of the launch, we will launch it across Europe initially, because the CE-IVD is a pan-European clearance, so it will be available with our distributors and also with our direct sales channel initially. And then we will have to see about how to potentially migrate into the US with this product, but it's a little bit of a different story. The FDA has a different regulations, so initially our focus is on Europe.
Okay, thanks. And funny you should mention the FDA, because the second question here is, Henrik Stender was last year elected to the board of directors. One of the reasons for his election was his long experience with FDA applications. Can you tell us what the plans are for an FDA application for Supernostic, and what will potentially be the direction of the application? Will it be for specific use of Supernostic, or will it be for more general use of Supernostic as a biomarker? And finally, what will the impact and perspectives be for ViroGates if Supernostic reaches an FDA approval?
Yeah, again, a good and very broad question that I could probably speak to for many hours, but we have, as mentioned, guided, and this is also in our prospectus from when we IPO'd, said the existing cash is basically not sufficient for doing a full clearance with the FDA. The reason for that is that the FDA, under the conventional application route, the 510K de novo, as it's labeled, will ask for clinical data, actual clinical data in the US. We've done lots of research in the US on US patients, but they will require us to do a confirmatory clinical study. So that is not within the budgets that we currently have. So if we are to go full throttle that way, we need to raise additional cash, and so that's the one caveat. Anyone following the COVID knows, or probably also knows, that there's something called emergency use authorization, and this is a sort of a little bit lighter way to enter a market. It's basically a time restricted approval, so it's only when the emergency situation is there. There are some products that are launched in the US under that scheme, and that may be possible for us, but we cannot be completely specific on this, because it's highly it's seen as insider knowledge. So anything that we communicate in that way very specifically, we need to do in terms of a corporate release. So it's something that we would like. The reason why we've not done it, I could say 2-3 years back, is that we wanted the right products, the right clinical products to be available before we made that move.
Okay, thanks. A different question here. Can you share an estimate of how large a fraction of your current sales that is specific to COVID triage?
Yeah, it's again, that's a good question. We the composition of our sales, as also seen, is slightly evidenced by the product mix, but obviously so there's a portion that is research use, and that's typically the 20-25% as it is currently. The rest is clinical sales, and that needs to be split then between COVID-19 and the traditional emergency use. And it's a little bit difficult to split this lukewarm water into two buckets, because COVID-19 is currently an integral part of triaging in the ED. Typically the tests are done the same in the same place, but we obviously know from some of our customers that they're using our products for COVID-19, and currently it's more than 50% of our half-year result that is coming from COVID-19 related use, and the other one is ED. And it's also important for me to say we are not a COVID-19 company as such. We always encourage the customers to use this as a general measure to risk stratify their patients. And as the case is right now, we have COVID to a larger and smaller degrees, depending on the individual markets, with patients, and it has a utility in that, but it's basically the same as with any other viral infection that could happen. suPAR has a role to play. We've documented that it's extremely relevant to risk assess the COVID-19 patients, whether they have a serious development or not. But we are actually pushing the general ED triage rather than the COVID, because we think it has much more utility in the EDs in general.
Right. Next question. How much equipment or devices or infrastructure will be needed to do a measurement with the POC Plus product besides the actual device that has been shown in the presentation?
Basically, there's a small off-the-shelf computer that is supplied with the device that you saw. The device has a footprint of, which is important especially for ambulance use, of about 10 centimeters to 3 centimeters, so, or maybe 5. But so it's relatively small, and then you just need any PC with an operating system to guide the device, and also to have the readout. So it's very easy to use.
Okay, great. That's all the question from the audience so far. I have some of my own, and I will just repeat the the tip to the audience that you can write your questions. Some of you have found it already. It's marked with a headline says questions. You can write the questions there and we will read them out. But I wanted to bring the attention back to the Anakinra study and the developments there, where your cooperation with Sobi. And you said that you expect an approval or at least a decision back from EMA in October. Is that the timescale that has been confirmed with EMA?
That is something that we have confirmed with Sobi. It's basically we are not directly involved in the regulatory process as such, because EMA is not the governing body for diagnostics. So we are supplying information by ways of the professor who's conducted the study as primary investigator. But it's EMA's process, it's Sobi's process with EMA. But what they have reported to the public and to us is that they have a target date with EMA and confirmed by EMA of sometime in October. Anything like that is subject to potential changes because EMA is busy with all sorts of things, but they have felt confident about reporting that. Okay.
And if you're lucky enough to get an approval in October, what happens then? How fast will the actual rollout and market preparations evolve from there? And do you expect to kick it off right away, or what sort of delays would you expect?
We don't expect too many delays. Actually, as I sort of alluded to, we have 42 participating hospitals that were part of the study, and some saw more patients than others, but those are already aware of the product. Many have said they will await the actual label extension of the current product in order to implement it clinically and await the review. But from there on, we are actually ready to go. And since the customers are basically the same that we will be calling on anyway, the COVID-19 awareness is already there by ways of the reportings on the preliminary findings that I mentioned here, but we also expect a peer-reviewed article to come out anytime soon. We haven't guided on it because, again, the peer review may take a month, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 in terms of the follow-up questions that the reviewers have. So that will obviously also be something that is circulating in the clinical community. We've seen it with, for instance, remdesivir and dexamethasone that were basically taken up by the market without a sort of traditional full assessment of the utility in that particular disease. We know that there's already an audience out there that are receptive of the messages that we will come out with. So we expect it to be a relatively fast launch. However, it will not likely have a material impact for the numbers that we will be having for the second half year. It always takes a couple of months before anyone gets really going.
And I just want to highlight and refer back to what the discussion we had after your Q1 report, that a peer-reviewed article can also be a very important driver of demand for ViroGates, at least, because I mean, if such a publication comes out, then that will make it known to the wider public that there's a good sense in using super testing for any kind of a drug that has important side effects, and Anakinra is one of them. But does it mean, what you're saying now, does it mean that what comes first between the peer-reviewed article and the EMA announcement, that's really a tough call?
It's a tough call, and I wouldn't place much money on the bet. But I would hope that the peer review comes first. But it's a speculation. We've seen these review processes taking longer than expected. So anything may happen. And I would expect that the authors or the clinical investigators would be targeting one of the more renowned articles, because the data, as said, are so strong. So that obviously also means that the peer review is harder than with a sort of second tier review.
Mm. And are you currently in discussions with Sobi about how you will go about marketing the combined product?
Yes, we are. One caveat though, we do not have an authorization to market Anakinra. So obviously those sales needs to be conducted by Sobi. But needless to say, we are talking to operational people at Sobi for how we want to target the market, what kind of messages will be conveyed, and so on and so forth. So yes, we have direct relations, and that includes both our direct sales channel and also our distributors. So we're very pleased working like that. It's not a joint venture. We don't have any sort of contractual agreements as such, but needless to say, we need a coherent message so our audience understands how they need to use the super to actually get to the adequate patients, and that's both in the interest of Sobi and us.
Mm-hmm. And a final question, you note in the quarterly report, or the half-year report, I should say, that you have seen an increasing COVID-19 dependency in the demand for super tests. But if we were to hypothesize that COVID-19 would disappear tomorrow, of course, COVID-19 is both positive and negative in terms of demand for, because it has been hindering you in your sales efforts. But I mean, in the eventual event that the COVID-19 just goes away, is that's positive or negative for ViroGates, would you say?
Well, it is something that we've observed, and as you rightly mentioned, right now our only way into hospital has been to talk COVID-19, because as you may recall, last in the spring of 2020, everything that we had planned, ongoing evaluation, potential implementation, and so on, was stopped overnight by all our customers, because they were not able to do any work. They were basically put in a state of emergency and were only allowed to focus on COVID-19. So our only way to talk to them was actually COVID-19, and that was obviously a blow on our sales efforts and also on the results that we yielded, and we've also made that publicly known. However, we are working very hard now, since some of the hospitals are opening up to discussions that we've had in the past, and therefore we are working very diligently to convert the hospitals, the accounts that we're already working with in a COVID-19 setting, to become traditional general triage with Supernostic. So that is our primary focus. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 is not our core game. We are basically about risk stratification, triaging, and we want to highlight that to our customers. So now is the time where we started re-engaging on those discussions, but it's been a long pause for us in terms of our traditional business, where COVID has only been a measure that we could put up with the potential customers that had an interest in that particular field.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I don't have any more questions, and I haven't received any more from the audience either. So thanks very much, Jakob, for your careful explanations to all of the questions, and for a good presentation. So I also want to thank everybody in the audience for taking time to listening, and we will see each other again in 3 months' time or so.
Thank you very much, Alf, and attendees.
Thank you.